And looks like that's getting started. All right, so good morning, everyone. It's getting started. You can. Great. So, sorry, you just heard me talking on YouTube. It's confusing. So good morning, everyone. My name is Emily Andrews. I'm the Executive Director of the U.S. Green Building Council Missouri Gateway Chapter. Pleased to welcome everyone here for Energy Efficiency Day. October 6th is Energy Efficiency Day. And we are celebrating by presenting this benchmarking and energy efficiency carousel on getting to BEPS, the city's Building Energy Performance Standard. I'm excited to have a great lineup of presenters here today, and just working on controlling the PowerPoint presentation. Give me a minute. All right, here we go. So why are we here today besides Energy Efficiency Day and everyone wanting to get up at 8 o'clock this morning to be on Zoom with us? We're here because green buildings, and specifically energy efficiency in our buildings, offer a great opportunity to address climate change and climate action. So I consider building energy efficiency to be a real win-win solution. If you look at this slide from the World Resources Institute, it shows that building efficiency is one of the lowest cost emission reductions that we have available to us. And we really need to be taking advantage of that. So we're here today to talk about energy efficiency in our buildings. And I'm pleased to introduce our first presenter, Rajiv Ravulapati, who's the Government Services Analyst with the City of St. Louis Building Division. He'll soon be managing the division's Office of High Performance Building, and he's here to give us an update and an overview of the Building Energy Performance Standard. So Rajiv, take it away. And you can just let me know when to advance the slides.
Sounds good, Emily. Thank you. Just give me like a 1 or 2 minute warning when I'm coming up near my time. Thanks, Emily, and thanks to the USGBC for hosting this great event today. Morning, everybody. As Emily said, my name is Rajiv Ravulapati. I work for the Building Division for the City of St. Louis, and I'm going to give a high-level overview of the city's Building Energy Performance Standard that was passed back in April of 2020. You can go forward, Emily. So the things I'm going to talk about in terms of overview is going over what BEPS is. BEPS is the acronym that we will use going forward. It stands for Building Energy Performance Standards. Why the city looked to pass this ordinance, some of the policy elements and the timeline that we're currently operating under, the targets themselves, the actual standards that buildings will have to meet by the end of 2025 and 2027. Talking about a new city board that the ordinance established called the Building Energy Improvement Board and their functions. And just talking about what we've been doing on the city side and also in conjunction with some of our partners on getting building owners primed and ready for BEPS. So what is BEPS? BEPS is a legal requirement for building owners to ensure their buildings meet a minimum energy performance, hence the standard. So the city has had benchmarking since 2017, and we look to build upon that ordinance with BEPS. We were going through some different iterations of what should the next generation policy look like. And from what we heard from our stakeholders is instead of making something more prescriptive or kind of a multiple choice option, or like a retro commissioning or audit requirement, we wanted to just jump to getting our buildings meeting a certain performance standard versus just those smaller solutions. One reason we also made this policy to be pretty aggressive is because the city has an aggressive greenhouse gas reduction goal, 100% by 2050. Now, I do want to remind folks that that goal, it is a non-binding goal resolution that the city has. regardless of it being non-binding or binding, BEPS is the single largest climate-related bill the city's passed to date, and it works in seamlessly with our overall decarbonization strategy. BEPS is one of several policies that have been passed in the past couple of years that aim to decarbonize our cityscape. We've had benchmarking since 2017. We have BEPS to address building energy efficiency, or rather the inefficiencies of our buildings. We've got a solar readiness ordinance. We have an electric vehicle ordinance. There is some work being done within City Hall on trying to get municipal buildings on renewable energy. There's new bike paths and carbon-free mobility options being worked on with the Planning Department and Urban Design. So it all fits into the city's climate protection initiative. And also BEPS addresses one of the not so bright spots of our city is that when you look at the greenhouse gas inventory, the last one was done in 2018, buildings account for nearly 80% of those emissions. So BEPS is a policy that can help address those emissions. You can go to the next one, Emily. So this slide right here just shows, gives you a feel of that this policy or benchmarking policies or these kind of building improvement policies are not a trend. They're here to stay. They vary across the country depending on your local jurisdiction. St. Louis is one of 5 jurisdictions that have a building performance policy. The other 4 are the state of Washington, Washington, D.C., New York City, and Boston is the 5th one. Actually just passed a couple weeks ago. You can go to the next one, Emily. So this slide I'll move through kind of quickly, but we went through a lengthy stakeholder process. This timeline right here shows July 2019, but we actually started engaging stakeholders much earlier on in 2019 about what should be next for St. Louis after a benchmarking policy. So we held these meetings on a bi-monthly basis to kind of hear different perspectives and also for us to get feedback on what the city had been thinking. Because before we even thought of BEPS, we had thought about those other policies I talked about before, a prescriptive policy or an audit or retro commissioning policy. But we were told very much directly to our faces that a performance policy would be much more impactful for a variety of reasons that I'll continue to get into. You can go to the next one, Emily. And this is just a slide I just want to give St. Louis a shout out for about how our progress has been recognized. St. Louis, if you read the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, ACEEE, they put out these city scorecards. And in 2019, St. Louis was ranked 36 out of 100. And in 2020, we jumped up 8 spots to 28. And a big reason for that jump in that rating was those other ordinances I mentioned, like solar readiness, but our building energy performance standard was a key reason is why we've jumped up and are now one of the most improved cities in the country. Go to the next one, Emily. So I'm going to talk now a bit more in depth about the policy itself. So like I mentioned, each jurisdiction has a different chief performance metric. We use what's called site energy use intensity. It's weather normalized. Site energy use intensity, if you're not familiar with that, it's the amount of energy being used at the building level on site, the amount of energy being used per square foot. Our standards have been finalized. They were passed and approved by the board, the Building Energy Improvement Board, back in May of this year. And they're based on using local benchmarking data and looking at the local 35th percentile within each of those property types. And they're calculated so that at least 65% of buildings have to improve their energy and performance. And if you're wondering why, we use that percentile and why it's so aggressive, one of the reasons is our buildings are very much lagging behind their national counterparts. So this is another reason why we're trying to be aggressive with the policy, but also keeping in mind that we have some flexibility built in for compliance that I'll talk about a little bit later. And this ordinance applies to building 50,000 square feet and above. So the way compliance will be measured and tracked is with benchmarking, the benchmarking ordinance. Building owners use Energy Star Portfolio Manager to report their energy and water usage. we will continue to have building owners use portfolio managers so we can monitor and track how they are getting, how close or far away they are from their target EUI from the standard itself. So this will just continue to be a tool that building owners will use. One thing that distinguishes this policy versus benchmarking is that data verification will be required when the compliance cycle is over. So what that means right now is it's one of the steps we're working through in rulemaking and through our master BEPS manual or compliance guide that we'll issue out to building owners. Verification will be something that will look like getting a sign off by a third party, like a professional engineer or architect, for your data that you're submitting and verifying that it is accurate and measured. Go to the next one, Emily. So this right here, and I'll make sure to drop this in the chat too. This is a high-level infographic by property type of BEPS. So when you look at our reporting, our benchmarking reports, we've got about 44 unique property types that comply with benchmarking each year. That's a lot of different property types, and some of those property types can be grouped into what we call BEPS super categories. That first column that you see on your left, in the middle is the standard itself for each of those BEPS super categories. So we've got about 22, 23 BEPS super categories for the policy. And this often trips folks up. With EUI, the lower the value, the more efficient you're building. With Energy Star scores, that 1 to 100 score, the higher your number, the more overall efficient your building is, or your performance is. So that blue line in the middle represents that BEPS target, and you can see how many buildings roughly are, at or below that that indicator. And when you look at buildings like schools, multifamily housing, warehouses, offices, there's a large cluster of buildings that are either right at that target or right above it. So this is just to give folks an idea of, each dot represents a building, the blue line represents BEPS, and, how close some of these property types are to already meeting the policy. And there are already a swath of buildings that will be compliant if BEPS started today. You can go to the next one, Emily. So in terms of timeline, this is not something where building owners have to meet their target by, it's an annual requirement like benchmarking. We understand that, this kind of large scale improvement, and for some buildings, it will be deep energy retrofits, that they will need time. So for most buildings, they will have 4 years to meet the standard. Implementation and official notification of the policy will begin before 2021 is over, so winter. And for qualified and affordable housing, they will have 6 years to meet the standards, so by 2027. And the reason for that is it's something that we heard directly from some of our local and national stakeholders, the National Housing Trust, groups like the Housing Authority, Renew Missouri. We wanted to give them more time and also build in some equity for particularly these type of groups, or housing groups, building groups rather, simply because they are woefully under-resourced here in St. Louis. Affordable housing has strict refinancing guidelines that they have to abide by. So those are reasons as to why we gave them an extra 2 years to meet BEPS or meet compliance. You can go to the next one, Emily. So I'm going to get into the compliance pathways right now. And so there are 4 compliance pathways that we have for the policy. The first one is what we simply call the performance policy, where, if you're going through the compliance cycle and your building's already at or below the standard, all you have to do is maintain that level of performance within each compliance cycle, and you are considered compliant when you report through your benchmarking data. The second one is called rewarding early adopters. The name may change, but tentatively this is what we've been calling it. And this is to incentivize building owners to make those deep energy improvements now versus later, because if you are at or below the 35th percentile and you reduce by 20% or by 50% or more, this is where the city will treat you as compliant from multiple cycles. So for potentially as long as 15 15 years and beyond. So this is really aimed at getting those building owners to start investing in their buildings now. You go to the next one, Emily. These next two compliance pathways. Thank you. These next two compliance pathways fall underneath the umbrella of alternative compliance pathways. So what this means is if you're going through the decision tree of choosing what compliance pathway you're going to choose to report to be in compliance for the city, if the performance doesn't work out for you or early adopters, so you can't actually meet the target itself, then we will treat compliance in a different fashion, where one option is a percentage reduction path. So if you can reduce your consumption by 50% between your baseline and the standard, we will treat you as compliant. If that is still not a viable option for building owners, then we've got what we call the custom path, where you will be required to get an ASHRAE level 2 audit done. And based on those recommended measures from that audit, a building owner will have to choose which measures they're going to implement and have that all submitted and approved by the Office of Building Performance, and also in some cases potentially by the board, because there will be an appeal process that will allow building owners to have if they don't find a judgment made by the building division in their favor, so they can appeal directly to the board. But no matter what, this has to be this will be a legally binding agreement between the city and the building owner on making sure that whatever you choose in terms of your custom plan has to also be implemented by the end of the compliance cycle. You can go to the next one, Emily.
You've got about a minute left, Rajiv.
Okay, I'll speed through. So I mentioned the Building Energy Improvement Board. This is a 9-member board that currently is functioning. And some of the duties for this board is, like I mentioned earlier, to approve the standards for each compliance cycle, but also work with the Office of Building Performance and building owners on reviewing some of those alternative compliance plans and providing some guidance for building owners on how to navigate each of these compliance pathways. So this board will be very important in working with our office and working with building owners to get them into compliance and understand what compliance will mean for each individual building. You know, the next one, Emily. So I'm wrapping up near the end of my presentation. So what can you as building owners start doing now to get ready for BEPS? You know, all of this is rooted in benchmarking data. So, you know, double check your benchmarking data in Portfolio Manager. If you know you've got buildings coming online in the next couple of years that will be subject to benchmarking in BEPS, start putting together a team so you can manage that data and comply with both these ordinances. Start, you know, working on a potential energy audit, identify those conservation measures, and start engaging with your building tenants if you're a building that has multiple tenants within your buildings of potential changes coming down the line. You go to the next one, Emily. This right here is just an example of a building energy scorecard. This is something new that the city started doing back in 2019. It gives the building owners an understanding of their energy statistics, but also it'll give them an idea of how close a building is or far from their BEPS target. So for example, this building right here, this is the city's court. This is civil courts. Back in 2019, they had an EUI of 129.7. The BEPS target for this building type is 112. So they're close, but they wouldn't be treated in compliance. So this is to give building owners an idea of how far or close they are to that target. So I think I'm wrapping up now. So, you know, there will continue to be more educational opportunities for BEPS as well as benchmarking. These next events coming up, we've got a benchmarking basics and help session. We've got a BEEP demo coming up. This is a tool offered by Ameren where building owners can now get aggregated whole building data from the utility. And then we've got some training opportunities available for property managers and building staff to incorporate sustainability and green practices into their operations and maintenance of a building. Last thing, so currently right now, the next steps are, you know, the USGBC will be launching a local building energy exchange. This will be a resource hub for building owners. And one of the primary functions initially will be to help work with building owners that have to comply with BEPS. We at the Building Division are still working on some rulemaking on the compliance pathways, and we'll be issuing out some compliance documents before the year is over or early next year for building owners. If you have, further questions, drop them in the chat. My email's there, and you can feel free to contact me outside of this presentation today. But thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Rajiv. Does anyone have any questions now? We have a couple minutes in between presentations to take a few questions. Anything for Rajiv?
Emily, is this program going to be somewhere where we can download the slides and stuff?
Well, we're live streaming on YouTube, so it will be available there to watch in the future, but I can also make the slides available after this as well.
Thank you very much.
Yep, no problem. Any other questions for Rajiv? Have we given this presentation enough that no one has questions anymore?
Bob asked a question. I see. What is the penalty for missing the goals or not meeting the standard? Valid question. So if those 4 compliance pathways are, you can't use any of those. At the end of the day, the last resort there will be a compliance penalty. Right now, what that is initially it is $500, but every day out of compliance will be treated as a separate offense. So the fines can rack up, and so they are cumulative. But the bigger stick will be the potential withholding of certain building permits, specifically commercial occupancy permits. Now, that is the very last resort. So we're hoping that with these compliance pathways, we've built in enough flexibility for building owners to work with the city and the board on getting them into compliance. Because remember, if you can't meet the performance pathway or the early adopters, which are focused on actually meeting the BEPS target, the standard, then we will move you over to this umbrella of alternative compliance where you can't meet the standard, but you can be in compliance if you cut your percentage by half, or you go through an energy audit and do some of those measures that come out of that audit. But we're still working on the final details of the penalties. And no, historic buildings will not be exempt.
All right. One more question, anyone? Before we move on.
Oh, I'm just curious how it's going so far, Rajiv, with just with everything overall and BEPS in its first year and all that good stuff.
Right. So initially, the policy was passed last year, and we were aiming to begin implementation of the policy last year. The pandemic exacerbated things. It made some delays in terms of the building division making some hiring. So one of the things that we're currently working on right now, like I said, is implementation will begin, official notification will begin later this winter. We are going through a hiring process right now. By the end of October, we will have 3 new staff members within the Office of Building Performance. So we'll be an office of 4 working on this policy. We have been working with the board. We have our standards published and approved. We have our compliance pathways published and approved. Now, what we're currently working on is just compiling all this information into a guidance document for building owners. And we're also working on a new dashboard internally at the city that building owners will use in order to track their compliance with BEPS. So still a lot being worked on right now. But like I said, my email is on this slide, but I'll drop it in the chat as well. If people have more direct questions or other questions for me about the policy or benchmarking, please reach out.
I have one quick question. Rajiv, do you have any guidance for buildings that have commercial buildings where their populations may have dwindled throughout COVID? I've done benchmarking for a number of buildings and their EUI has actually improved, but that's because there aren't very many people in the building. I think hopefully we can expect that by the time we reach the end of this compliance cycle in a few years here, that those buildings are going to be back up to population. So it may look like, based on if they look at Energy Star, they're compliant now or just compliant. But if they're, if they don't do anything, it's possible that their EUI is going to go back up again. Do you have any guidance for those buildings to make sure that they don't think they're all good and then suddenly find out that in 4 years they're not?
Sure. So one thing with the policy is, so after each compliance cycle, this policy is meant to be a continuous improvement policy, right? So the targets will potentially the aim is to get to be more stringent as the years go by. Now, are those standards are based in the city's best year of reporting, 2018. So there are still a large swath of buildings that have not reported. And so as we continue to collect benchmarking data after each compliance cycle, the building division will take a gap year where we will reevaluate and reassess what the standards will be. It's a hard question to kind of answer, just because, once we get more additional benchmarking data and we are continuing to trend upward in terms of reporting, we'll have to see what kind of performance those non-reporters show in the data. So I don't have the best answer for you, Matt, but one thing I will also answer in terms of like occupancy, for example, this policy does have extensions and exemptions built into it. So for building owners that are experiencing, low level occupancy, or buildings that have unique circumstances that they cannot comply, or they're used primarily for manufacturing, industrial, communications, and a couple other reasons, there is exemptions built into the policy.
Yeah, I guess like more specifically, like if you had a building and your EUI was, like say pre-COVID, like an
Matt,
office building.
Why don't you send me your question via email? Just because
Okay.
I think Emily wants to move on to the next presenter.
Okay. Yep.
You're on mute, Emily.
It's a good question, Matt. I think it probably requires a little more conversation, but I do want to move on to the next presentation. So appreciate everybody's interest in this. Next up, we have Nick Arb and Dena Schmid from Guarantee Electrical. Dena is the Senior Manager of Energy Solutions, and Nick is the Vice President of Market Strategies. They're going to discuss practical ways to save energy in your building. Want to take it away?
Great. Thanks, Emily. Yeah, so I just want to give you a little bit of quick background about Guarantee. So Guarantee was founded in 1902 in anticipation of the 1904 World's Fair. So been in the city for 120 years. So we're really excited the steps that the city is taking to improve its energy efficiency. We're going to touch on a few different options today for energy solutions, and I'm going to let Dena introduce herself as well.
Hello, everyone. I'm actually now the Director of Energy Solutions because we find this to be so important in our community that we've added a couple team members, and we have multiple people in the office trying to go out and offer these services to save energy in many different ways. We've got a lot of people in the field, but I've been at Guarantee for 13 years. Started out, just selling solar lighting, and it's really evolved into quite the big operation. I got two team members in the office. Thank you, Emily. But anyway, we do everything from charging stations, lighting controls, VFDs. We can help with refrigeration and the motors, making that more efficient, just all kinds of good stuff. So that's where we're at.
Yeah, and if you want to advance the slides here, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about some energy solutions. Let's go again. Next slide. So kind of turn a phrase, low-hanging fruit. There are some pretty easy options to increase your energy efficiency in your building. As Rajiv mentioned, 80% of our energy usage comes from our buildings. And the next slide will kind of give you a depiction of how that breaks down. So if you can't quite read this, farthest to the left, the blue column represents lighting. So lighting, yes, there we go. Lighting accounts for 17% of our energy usage in our facilities. So it's the single largest consumption of energy is from our lighting systems. Then there's refrigeration, HVAC, computers, equipment, and so on. So we're going to spend most of our time today talking about lighting, but there are some other solutions as well. So let's get into it. Next slide. So kind of the hot phrase right now is LEDs. So light emitting diodes, they are the most efficient source of lighting. You know, lighting started with bonfires and candles and lamps, and then once modern electricity started with incandescent lights with the filament, really hot, really bright, really inefficient. So then we moved into HID lighting, which we'll talk about, fluorescent lighting, but now LED is the most efficient option that's out there. So let's talk about why LED is the best option.
So basically, LED is awesome because it's better in all facets of lighting. It is brighter, it is cooler, so it doesn't create as much heat. It has a longer life. The life is double that of HID and fluorescent. It's actually a little more, but I like to be a little conservative on my numbers so that whatever we do outperforms what I say. You can save up to 80%, I mean, on outside stuff, which is incredible. Your maintenance is going to go down because they last that 50,000 hours plus. You don't have the maintenance anymore on ballast, on lamp change outs, on all kinds of different stuff. They offer a 5 to 10 year warranty depending on what the product is. And the best part is the light is distributed better. It's a better quality light. So it creates a safer space, a safer area outside. So really it's a win-win for everyone whenever you upgrade to LED.
So next we're going to kind of talk through some of the practical retrofit or change out options that are out there as you're looking around your facilities. You may see some of these light fixtures in the ceiling, and we're just going to talk very high level, what some of the change out options are and the energy savings attributed to that. So what's going on here on the left, Dena?
Okay, so the left is a very typical fixture most people have probably seen in their building. It is a parabolic 2x4. There is 2x4s and 2x2 fixtures all over commercial buildings, all over buildings, period. And they can actually be 93 to up to 150 watts. By going to LED, you can save so much energy. Typically, an LED retrofit kit or a new fixture is in that 42 watt range, and you can get that new awesome look for your facility. That's a center basketed fixture. There's now the flat panel that's really awesome. And the flat panel can go down to a 28 watt. So, I mean, from 130 watts to 50 watts is crazy, but 150 watts to 28 watts is even better. So imagine the energy savings just by changing out a fixture and the incentive you can get from Ameren. But if you have a smaller budget, you can do LED lamps. And LED lamps now are at 10.5 watts. So now you're at 42 watts just going to lamps. That's an awesome option for a lot of customers.
And I know we have a representative from Ameren that's probably going to be presenting a little more in depth about some of the incentives that are out there, but we just wanted to make everyone aware that Ameren is offering incentives to help offset the costs of some of these upgrades. Really depends on what you're replacing, how long they're on during the day, during the night. So just know that those incentives are out there, and I'm sure we'll get some more information about that later. We can probably move along to the next slide.
I was going to say, you could probably move along to the next 3 and get to the can lights.
There we go.
So like he said, Ameren offers awesome incentives that help pay for the project. So not only are you getting the savings, you're getting the incentives, and we can help with all that. And so can a lot of different companies. But this slide is can lights. It's another very, very popular thing in corporate conference rooms, all over, lobbies. And you can do a couple things. You can go to a retro kit if you want a new look that just pops in the old can, or you can do a lamp. A lamp is something that facility people can do easy to meet requirements that the city's mandating. You can screw them in and be LED and drop your wattage significantly.
Exactly, Tom. You're stealing my thunder.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we're gonna get to that, Tom. We're gonna get to how you can turn the lights off.
Love it. Let's keep going. Incentives available for lamps. Really easy application process. But let's talk a little bit about lights on the exterior of your building. So what's going on here, Dena?
Okay, that is a shoebox fixture on the left. It's 400 watt. They're also in 1,000, sometimes 250. They are very inefficient. they need to go bye-bye. We need to start installing the LED fixtures on the right. This is where you really get major savings. To go to LED, you can get an 80% savings in that 70-80% range just by switching the head. You can do LED lamps, again, if you don't have that kind of budget. So there are LED lamps you can put in those fixtures and be just as efficient. But the critical thing is not only are you saving that much energy, but it is much safer. There's no more dark spots, the light's evenly spread. And so it just creates a better environment.
Okay. Another option on the outside of your building, these are wall packs.
Wall packs, yes. And wall packs come as low as, 10 watts in LED. So, I mean, you can really save a lot of energy depending on how much light you need by getting a free assessment to look at, what your needs are on the outside. But yes, 400 watt, 1000 watt, 250 watt, again, same options in wall packs that are HID. And again, many different options, many different looks to go to LED. You can get any different price point to fit your budget. I mean, basically there is LED upgrades to fit any budget.
You mentioned that the lighting is not only is it more energy efficient, the lighting quality is better. So we've put up some pictures before and after of some projects. You can really see the dramatic change. So not only is it more energy efficient, they're saving more, the light quality is better. So what's going on in this picture?
So we actually upgraded that parking lot and just did a simple switch out to an LED head. I believe it was 150 watt. And you can just see that the lighting is better. I mean, it's night and day, literally.
Outside of the building, next slide is inside of a facility. That's definitely a safer work environment if you're driving a fork truck or something through that warehouse. No dark spots, a lot easier to see what you're doing, and more energy efficient. What's going on in this picture? That's a dramatic change.
So this was a cafeteria that kids used to eat in. So that's a high pressure sodium. That's that yellow look. All we did was upgrade to some actual white LED fixtures, save them over 50%. And now the kids can actually see their food and enjoy it. And it doesn't look disgusting. So again, this is a warehouse. The thing is, LED is going to save you all this energy. It's better lighting, but it also creates a safer work environment, which is actually going to increase productivity. When you're in a warehouse that's dark and dingy, the feeling in there is not good. So you brighten up the lights, people can see, they can be safer. Again, it's a win-win-win. Okay, this slide I love. This was a company that wanted to just do the minimum, get better lighting. We moved some fixtures around a little bit, but this is literally an LED lamp. So yeah, is it extreme in the difference? No, but it is better on the right for the LED, and that is just installing LED lamps. That's what's incredible. So now they're saving 60% energy. We literally just installed a lamp, and that's what you get. You don't even have to do new fixtures to get an improvement.
So next we wanted to walk through a couple examples of savings, and then we're going to talk about controls and ox sensors and daylight harvesting. So let's just talk about a typical change out what the energy savings and the cost savings was.
So we did a whole bunch of shop and saves, Schnucks now, Save-A-Lots, and we installed 650 LED lamps. We got rid of the ballast, so now you don't have to pay for ballast maintenance. The payback is under a year, 64% savings. And again, I'm not even including maintenance savings in this payback. This is just literally, this is how much the lights are on. This is the watts now. This is the watts once we upgrade. So they're saving, I don't know, about $700 a month. And then their cost after the incentive was only $8,500 on this one. Next slide. And this is just it in like a payback format. So it's the same numbers, just showing this is an example of something we give to the customer.
So that project paid for itself in less than a year.
Yes.
Gotcha.
A parking lot. So Ameren, Missouri doesn't give exterior incentives because the exterior lights aren't on at peak times. And I guess it doesn't fit the mandate in Missouri. But it doesn't matter because you can still save that 70-80%, create a safer parking lot, a safer space outside. And it was still a 2-year payback for 343 parking lot heads. And look at the monthly savings. They went from spending about $6,400 a month to $1,800 a month by just going to LED. Next
Okay.
slide.
Yeah, let's jump ahead.
I was going to
Get
say,
a few more examples.
you can skip this one. It's very similar. It's just more lamps like the Shop and Save. Great paybacks, great energy flow, cash flow.
So to Tom's point, this is something that you see all the time. Frustrates me. You see lights on in a building after hours, half that building's lit up, and I'm sure not half the people are working. So yes, certainly the best way to save energy is by not using it at all. So there are some easy controls that you can put in your building to automatically turn lights off. People are forgetful. What's going on with these devices?
So these sensors are some options you can use on the fixtures. The one on the left is a switch sensor. It's very, very inexpensive, and it is used whenever the switch can be seen throughout the whole room. So you could use it and it will detect your motion and sound. The one on the right is a ceiling sensor, and that's perfect for like a bathroom where you have stalls and you wouldn't want to be in the bathroom and it's not sensing you from the switch. So it's up in the ceiling. So those are two options. There's also fixture mounted sensors you can use. But again, you go to LED, you're saving that 60, 70% on your energy already. Now all of a sudden you're saving that. You turn the lights off when the room's not occupied by using a sensor, you're saving 100%. It's a very easy way to save some energy.
So let's go look at the next slide. This would be an application for a daylight harvesting sensor. What does that mean?
So it utilizes the sunlight. So if you have areas that have skylights, lots of windows, you can install a sensor that will turn the lights down as the sun's coming up, and it'll be at a certain foot candle. And there's some pretty awesome systems out there that they can install. You know, it depends on how expensive you want to get, that they can change the foot candles in different areas of the room and all kinds of stuff. But basically you're using the sunlight.
Using sunlight, but still getting the same appropriate light in the room.
It turns down very slowly, the lights, as the sun's coming up and the room's getting brighter from the sun.
Gotcha. So that's an office application. The next slide will show you some other applications for that. Bi-level fixtures. What's going on in the stairwell?
So stairwells obviously need light if there's an emergency per code. So you can't have them off possibly and not on whenever you need them. So you can add a sensor to stairwell lighting that drops them down so they're still on to 50% when no one's in the stairwell. So that's a great way to save energy on those 24/7 fixtures. Same with a garage. You can do the same thing.
Incentives available as well for some of the lighting controls that are out there, aux sensors and daylight harvesting, depending on what you're controlling. So we're going to shift a little bit away from lighting for a second and talk about other areas of your building that can help contribute to your energy savings. So mechanical rooms, pumps, blowers, motors, you can easily add what's called a variable frequency drive to those. A VFD, what a VFD does, on the next slide I'll show you, as a motor kicks on, it helps regulate the frequency and the voltage to that motor. And it's, in essence, as if you'd be turning on your car and just stomping on the gas right away. That's how most motors kick on. They're like full throttle right away. What a VFD does is it regulates that voltage and that frequency. So as if you're turning on your car and you're slowly pulling away and kind of ramping up to full power, essentially. It really contributes to energy savings, but it's also a lot easier and nicer on your motors, extending their life. One thing we didn't put in our slideshow that I did want to talk about real quick is submetering. So a really good way to monitor your energy consumption throughout a building is by adding meters on all your different circuits. So if you're in a multi-tenant office building and you're not really sure which space is contributing to your energy usage, a submeter will show you exactly which circuit is drawing how much power. So you can see maybe, who some of your big energy users are in your facility, or what circuits or what areas, rooms are using the most energy. Otherwise, on Ameren's side, there's, the meter that they're using that just shows the energy usage for the entire space. But by doing submetering, it can really help you dive into maybe which problems areas you need to address first. So with that, I think we want to leave some time for questions. if there's any from the.
We
the
do
group.
have a question in the chat from Bob. Are you including occupancy and sensor type controls both inside and outside? I think that was when you were talking through the case studies that came in.
Yeah, absolutely. So Dena talked through some of the interior applications for ox sensors. Those can be used outside as well. Photo
I was
cells
going
are
to
pretty
say,
typical.
I think outside it's a photo cell. So when the sun comes up, the lights turn off.
You'll also see it in parking garages or car dealerships. They may put an ox sensor on some of their parking lot lights. So they're maybe dimmed down 25, 50%. If there's nobody in the facility, they're still meeting minimum required foot candle levels. But if a car drives up or somebody walks up, those lights kick on to full brightness. It's another great way to control that light. Best way to save energy is by not using it. Other questions?
Yeah, other questions for Nick and Dena? Question from Tom, any consideration for dark sky recognition?
Yep. So I think, Tom, if what you're referring to there, correct me if you're wrong, but LED lights, another great benefit is it's not a light bomb. So you can be very specific about where that light is going to be projected. Typical HID, high pressure sodium lights, that kind of goes in all directions. And so with LED lighting, you're really just putting the light where you need it. They can do very specific, what's called light distribution types. So that light will go just right up to the edge of the property, won't spill out on the roadway, won't go up into the skies. And then same thing by putting a photo cell on there, you can turn those down when they don't need to be as bright.
We just had a major migration of birds headed south for the winter. We have the same thing with the monarchs and others, that actually it's beneficial to darken the outside environment. And there was a message that came out from our environmental program at the St. Louis Zoo to encourage different organizations to cut down on the outside lighting and the lighting where birds fly into windows and stuff like that. Major amount of environmental bird kill across the country.
Yeah, I believe
that we can actually have some impact on.
Absolutely. And I don't know when the last time anyone's flown into St. Louis, but dramatic change in the landscape from a few years ago with the streetlights being converted to LED. So, you know, you would have flown in, you would have seen that orange glow, high pressure sodium, that light's going everywhere. I don't know what percentage we're at with conversion, but I would say a large percentage of the St. Louis area has been converted to LED. It's a whiter, cleaner light. It's a safer light, but there's a lot less light pollution going up into the sky in directions where you don't need it. Rajiv, I can't read your whole question. Can somebody read it potentially?
I can read that. So what ways, or Rajiv, do you want to just ask?
Sure. Thanks for the presentation. I was just asking, like, what ways, if any, have you guys, as your group, engaged building owners about the city's BEPS policy? And my second question is just more of a general question, and this can apply to the other folks in on today's carousel. Is, you know, I'm always looking to coordinate better with partners on outreach. So, like, I'm just curious, like, what kind of thoughts you guys have from your side of how to coordinate outreach efforts between the city and entities like yours on getting building owners to do these kind of improvements, especially when there's a policy now that, you know, is mandating them to do so.
Yeah, we were talking about that right before we started, actually. We probably need to do a better job about training some of our energy solutions team to encourage folks to benchmark. We do a lot of lighting audits and help people kind of work through that retrofit process and navigate the Ameren incentive process. But with the building performance standard coming on board, I think that's something we need to encourage folks to participate, get engaged with Energy Star, benchmarking the properties. Guarantee started that process. I think it was the year before last through the, was it the Green Business Challenge and benchmarking. But I think we're probably behind the curve as well. So to your point, I think we can do a better job.
You can come to that benchmarking 101 session in a couple of weeks, Nick.
Perfect.
I think we have time for another question. Anybody have another question? All right. And I think just to the point that Rajiv was asking about before, if there are like talking points or flyers or something that would be helpful for us to provide related to, communicating this to clients, I think, we're definitely open to suggestions for that. So just throwing that out there. I see Lisa asked a question in the chat, and I think this is to Rajiv. If all the buildings have been notified, the non-compliant buildings have been notified. So if you want to quickly take that, and then we'll move on.
Sure. Yeah, like we will like administer our letters, our notification, like physical, like letter, direct mail, and digital communications officially this fall. But we've already begun to notify building owners that the standards have been published and the compliance pathways have been approved. But in terms of just like general notification, like we've not officially done that yet, but we will later this winter, Lisa.
Great. Thanks, Rajiv. And thank you, Nick and Dena, for a great presentation. Clearly a lot of opportunity that still exists for saving energy in our buildings, for sure. So we're going to move on to the next presentation. Next up, we have Matt Emden with Energy Resources Group. He is an energy analyst there, and he's going to talk to us about planning for BEPS compliance with an energy plan. Matt, do you want to get us started?
Yeah, definitely. So thanks, Emily. Thanks everybody who's presented so far. A lot of great information, and hopefully I can add to some of those helpful resources. So quick background on Energy Resources Group. The founder and current president started Energy Resources Group in the mid-70s, and it was established to manage the cost-effective implementation of environmental and energy efficiency technologies. Our core areas of competency are in the design and implementation of energy efficiency programs for both new construction and retrofits. And as you can see, we're an Ameren trade ally. We're a part of the Aspire Natural Gas Contractor Network, and we're also an Energy Star partner. All right, next slide, please. There we go. So as Emily said, today we're going to be talking about how we can plan for BEPS compliance with an energy master plan. So you're probably going to find that you're in one of these three admittedly broad categories, and that's that your EUI is lower than the building energy performance standard. And so you're probably thinking, this is great, I got nothing to worry about. Or you might find yourself in the next camp, which is your EUI is a little bit above the energy performance standard, but you're pretty confident that you can, become compliant within the program cycle. And the third camp is your EUI is way above the energy performance standard, and you really don't see any pathway to compliance, and maybe this is a little stressful for you. So let's start with the first camp. Next slide. And so obviously it's your energy performance, you're all good, right? Next two slides. There we go. Well, wrong. As Rajiv has already said, this isn't the end of there isn't one cycle and then we're done with it. Every cycle, it's gonna, the standards are gonna get a little bit tighter. So in 4 years, you may be compliant now, but in 4 years, when the next compliance cycle hits, you may find that you're not compliant. And the reality is, in the next, 10 years or so, you're going to have capital improvements on your building. There might be major pieces of equipment that you have to replace, repairs, upgrades to your building envelope. Maybe you're looking at doing some remodeling. So you're rearranging additions, all of those things. Those are prime opportunities for energy efficiency upgrades. And so you're ahead of the curve now. Let's take advantage of those opportunities so that you can stay ahead of the curve at the next compliance cycle. It also gives you the opportunity to take advantage of what Rajiv was talking about, which was the rewarding early adopters program. So you can find yourself, in a good position for the next 10, 15 years or more, as Rajiv said. So next slide, please. So to take advantage of this, you're really going to want to, establish an energy master plan. Next slide. And so the energy master plan is, we're going to set goals. And those goals are we're going to start by meeting with the leadership of the organization to understand your organizational trajectory. Is there any growth anticipated? Do you have any renovations planned? What are your financial investment and guidelines? So like, what's your cap fund? What's your, expected return on investments? Do you have a discount rate? What are some of those plans? And then I also want to try and understand or help you establish a energy investment policy. And of course, that policy is going to be there to provide guidance to your staff and other decision makers in the pursuit of energy efficiency and renewable energy investments. And so with this information, we can then help understand what energy targets you're trying to meet, by when, and in what context. Next. So after that, we're going to do a building utility analysis. And so with that, we're going to collect your utility data so that we can establish your energy baseline, see what your heating and cooling load dependencies are. And then this also gives us data to measure future energy efficiency measures off of. And then the next piece of equipment that we're going to start looking at, or next part of the plan, is an equipment life cycle analysis. And with that, we're going to start looking at the inventory of your energy efficiency equipment. So that's chillers, boilers, lighting systems, all of those things. And we're going to start collecting data on those. We'll do some site inspections to understand the use, interdependencies, right? Because no system operates in isolation. Lighting is a perfect example of that. We just heard a great presentation on that. And so lighting is cooler, right? It doesn't create as much heat. So that affects your cooling load. If you're not pumping as much heat through inefficient lighting, then you don't need to do as much cooling. The other side of that is in the winter time, you need to make up for that heat. So we're going to look at how all of those systems are working together.
Are you going to be on the covering house, Amory?
I'm in the middle of a presentation. Sorry. Sorry about that. So we're going to look at all those interdependencies and let's see, where was I? So we'll take a look at all of those pieces of equipment, and then we'll start developing a life cycle cost analysis for that equipment, and really understand what's the full cost of ownership, not just upfront costs. We really want to know what are all the soft costs along with that. What are the maintenance costs? How much energy is it going to cost? What's it really going to cost over the full life cycle of the equipment? And so then we'll determine which pieces of equipment need urgent repair or replacement, which pieces of equipment can be upgraded without replacement, and what's the integrated impact. Again, all of these systems working together. And then we'll take this data and use that to assist the prioritization of what needs to happen when. Next cycle. And then we're going to put that in a nice, neat, tidy report so that you have it. And in that report, we'll forecast all of your costs and savings. So we'll be able to say, all right, well, in 5 years, you're probably going to want to look at replacing your chiller. It'll be at life cycle. The cost for a new chiller is going to be, $100,000. It's going to save you this much energy because it'll be appropriately sized for your building. It'll be taking advantage of the latest technology. Maybe it's maglev, turbo core, who knows? And so we'll have all of those savings forecasted and then prioritized for you. So you now have a roadmap of what to prioritize. Next slide. So some of the added benefits of having an energy master plan is it allows you to start budgeting for your projects. So we know, 5 years we're looking at doing a chiller. Maybe we need to update some glazing on our building, whatever these are. Now we have a really established timeline, and we can start budgeting for those projects, make sure we're hitting all of our goals when we need to hit them. We're also ready in case of unexpected equipment failure. So say we're planning on, this chiller lasting us 5 more years, we get a year in and the chiller fails catastrophically, and it just doesn't make sense to repair it. This is the mode that we find a lot of building owners operating in: run it till it dies. And then it's the middle of summer, it's really hot, and we have to figure out how to quickly get this piece of equipment replaced and up and running. So what do? We replace like with like, and we miss out on a huge opportunity. Maybe this piece of equipment was oversized. It's probably 20, maybe even 30 years old, and there's a lot of new technology that's out there that will allow you to save energy. So now you have a roadmap, you have equipment specified, or at least you know what my load is, what technologies are out there. And so you're ready to replace that piece of equipment with something that's going to improve your building's energy performance. So you got a backup plan. You're in good shape. Having an energy master plan also allows you to take advantage of incentives that are out there. So for example, Ameren has a bonus incentive on lighting that's kind of wrapping up. With that incentive, they might announce it and they say, we have $2 million to give out in incentives, and it's on a first come, first served basis. So if you say, oh, here's this bonus incentive, we can take advantage of that. All right, let's start looking at our lighting. And by the time, you do your fixture count and you spec the technology that you want, you get the application submitted and you go through all of those steps, a lot of that money can be gone already, and you've missed out on an opportunity to maximize on it. But if you have an energy master plan in place and that incentive pops up, you can say, I'm ready. Let's get this application submitted, and you can be one of the early people to submit that application and really maximize those incentive dollars, making that project that much more affordable and increasing your rate of return. So go ahead and jump to the next slide, please. All right, so now let's say you're in that next camp. Your EUI is just above the energy performance standard. So you realize you got to do something to improve it, but you're probably gonna, it's doable. You're not freaking out. Next slide. Oops. In that case, even if you have some ideas like, oh, well, we can do a lighting upgrade. I see we have a bunch of fluorescent lighting around. We're still going to recommend that you do either an ASHRAE level 2 energy audit, or if it's applicable, retro commissioning. And then, of course, included in that, an energy master plan. And so we'll dive into what an ASHRAE level 2 energy audit is. Next slide. And so an ASHRAE level 2 energy audit, we're going to go in and we're going to collect a bunch of information on your building again. So we're going to try and get all of the drawings that you have available. Hopefully, we'll get your equipment schematics and equipment schedules, and really just get as much information as we can on your building and building systems. And then we'll do a site survey. So again, we're going to come out, we're going to take a look at your equipment. We're going to see how it works together. What are the interdependencies? What's the age, condition? How is it used? When is it used? All of that information. Again, we're going to do a utility analysis, kind of get a lot of that same baseline data and information. And then we're going to do what's called a loads analysis. And that loads analysis is really looking at your building and all of the heat flows. So in the summer, when we're cooling, we're looking for external and internal heat gains. In the winter, we're going to look and see where our heat loss is. And from there, we can really establish, how much cooling do you need in the building? How much heating do you need? And what are your ventilation rates? Are we over-ventilating, under-ventilating, and really dialing all of that in? And so that loads analysis is going to say, if we know that your chiller is oversized, which is a common practice in the 90s and around that time, we can say, great, we can downsize your chiller. That's going to save you money in upfront costs and save you money in operating costs when it comes time to replace that. Or maybe there are modifications we can do, like putting a VFD on your chiller and then associated pumps. And we're also going to detail the energy efficiency measures. So these are, what are the things that you can do? Which ones have the highest payback? And, how should we prioritize those based on, age, condition, and financial reward on those. And so lighting may be the best one, but we might find that there's also lighting and, just reducing the amount of outdoor area you're bringing in because you're over ventilating your spaces, which could be no cost. So go ahead and jump to the next slide, please. So there's also retro commissioning. Now this is specific to buildings typically over 50,000 square feet and that have a building automation system. And so retro commissioning is going to be a deep dive into your building automation system. We're going to look at things like your sequence of operation, look at all the programming and set points, all of the pieces, physical pieces of the system. So your controllers, all of your sensors and all of those things. And we're going to dive in and really tune your building up and make sure that it's operating at its peak efficiency. Now, one of the benefits with retro commissioning is Ameren offers incentives on it. And so those incentives are going to be for the RCX measures that we identify. So those are like EEMs, but specifically have a payback of 1.5 years or less. And then they also offer incentives that help offset the cost of that study. At Energy Resources Group, we also do an ASHRAE Level 2 audit along with RCX. So then you get your RCX measures and your energy efficiency measures. And those energy efficiency measures are anything with a payback longer than 1.5 years, but typically less than 10 years, because once you start getting out past 10 years, it doesn't always make economic sense to do those. You're best off using your money in other places. So the benefit of integrating that ASHRAE Level 2 audit with RCX is that the incentives that help pay for RCX also help pay for that ASHRAE Level 2 audit. And now you might notice that there's a lot of overlap between the work that we do for RCX and the ASHRAE Level 2 energy audit and our energy master plan. So if you're going to do those two things, you might as well tack on the energy master plan, because it's just a little bit more work. And then you really get this big roadmap to help, guide your building's, progression and continuing to move forward with your energy efficiency targets. Next slide, please. So now let's say you're in the third camp. You're looking at the BEPS standard, and it's half of the energy, half of what your current EUI is. And you're kind of stressed out about this. You don't know what you're going to do. Next slide. Again, we're going to make the same recommendations. We're going to want to do the ASHRAE Level 2 energy audit, and if applicable, throw on the retro commissioning, and then also give you the energy master plan. You might be surprised, once we start doing these analyses and finding ways that we can help save you energy, you might actually find that it's actually achievable to become compliant. If you can't, next slide. We're here. We have a great relationship with Rajiv and the city, and we can help you start, working with the city on those alternative compliance pathways. We'll be able to say, well, we've done the energy audit, we've done the retro commissioning. Here's how much energy we can save. This is realistic, and find that, help you stay in that compliance pathway and avoid those fines for not being compliant. I also recommend that if you feel like you're in this camp, take action now. Don't wait. Like Rajiv said, and I think this is really important, if you can't find compliance and you haven't established the compliance pathway, you have to, you're going to have to do that. So if you're, say, the custom measure where you do the audit and you do the RCX or whatever, and they come back and say, all right, this is what you have to do. Rajiv, had indicated all of that work has to be done by the end of the compliance pathway. Now, RCX and energy audits, those take time. We need to collect data. We need to do the analysis. So get started early and figure out what those are. We can work with the city, establish what it is that you need to do, and then we need time to implement. And so that'll help ensure that you don't hit those added extra fees. And so I also want to just circle back, if you're in that first camp again, and you're looking at, you're already good and you're going to do the work of an energy master plan, because there's so much overlap with RCX and an ASHRAE Level 2 energy audit, you might as well, do it all. And then you can take advantage of all the incentives that Ameren has to offer. So again, Ameren has incentives on RCX. And then also for your different energy efficiency measures, there are many incentives for, variable frequency drives, any other improvements that you're making. And even if they don't have a specific incentive, we can also apply for a custom incentive. One of the things Rajiv stated too is at the end of the cycle, there's going to be some sort of verification process. And so when you do an ASHRAE level 2 audit and retro commissioning, measurement and verification is included. And so when they go back and they say, all right, we want to verify, what your energy performance is, you'll have all of that information. We'll have it already right there for you and can help you with that step. So that doesn't become, another headache for you to have to deal with. Next slide, please. And so that's kind of a high level overview. I just want to iterate, we're not really a turnkey solution. Buildings are unique. They've had many different arrangements and pieces of equipment over the years. There are a lot of interdependencies. So it could be that you do a lighting upgrade, but then you never see the energy improvement. Why? Well, you're still emitting the same amount of light. That takes a little bit of energy. And then you have the added heat from that. It may be that your reheat has noticed that, you don't have as much heat in that room. And now your reheat has taken over and started pumping the extra little bit of heat back into your space. And so now you have LED lights, but you don't have the associated energy savings. And so it's important that when we look at building systems, we don't look at them in isolation. These systems are constantly working for and against each other. If we make one change in one place, it can have unintended consequences somewhere else, and it might be good, might be bad. We really want to dive in and take a thorough look and understanding of that. I think that's all I had.
Thank you, Matt. Anybody have questions? We have a couple minutes for questions.
Let's see. I see a few in here. Weather normalization. That's pretty standard. We have our own in-house tools that we've developed. So, I don't know that there's anything special about weather normalization. They're pretty standard practices to do that.
And portfolio manager does some of that too, correct?
Yeah, definitely. Let's see, will there be deadlines with each compliance cycle when ACPs have been submitted and approved in the last 2 years? This is probably a better Rajiv question than it is for me. From what I heard,
I think that's a comment that Rajiv was making. So.
Oh, got it. Rajiv, yeah, that's.
Yep, just a comment I was making.
Okay, so there will be deadlines within each compliance cycle when ACPs have been submitted. The last 2 years of each compliance will be time. Okay.
Right. Well, this is one of the pieces I mentioned earlier that we're still going through the rulemaking process. But, because of obviously, the level of work that's going to be done, it's going to be different for each building. But we want to make sure we're giving building owners enough time to get that work implemented. So that's why the last 2 years of a compliance cycle, before then, you've got to have your ACPs in and approved by the city. So then those last 2 years can be focused on, you working with your vendors to get those measures installed.
Yeah, I see that Tom made a comment about tree planting and how that can contribute to old school savings. Like there's that connection between shading and cooling and the urban heat island effect. I think that's a really good, a point of consideration as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And those are very economical solutions. It doesn't cost a whole lot to plant a tree. Green roofs can cost a little more because sometimes you have to do the engineering and make sure your roof can handle the weight load of all of the added soil and water. But it's a great way. It's also a great way to involve community and improve the environment of your building.
Interestingly, Ameren is actually hosting a urban heat island effect collaborative, a discussion around that. And I think as they are working towards their next round of incentives, they may include, there's the possibility there might be something included related to that. And of course, that all has to be approved at the state level through the Public Service Commission, but it's encouraging that it's something that folks are considering. So, other questions for Matt? All right. Well, Matt, thank you very much. This is a great presentation for people to think about, like where they are and you know, kind of what their next steps might be when it comes to meeting the performance standard. We're going to move on to our next set of presentations. We have actually, I'm calling this the resource section of today's carousel. So we'll hear from the next three presenters. I'm going to have them present back to back, and then we'll open for Q&A when they finish before we wrap up. So I'm pleased to introduce the newest member of the USGBC-Missouri Gateway team, Cara Spencer. She is our new director of the Building Energy Exchange St. Louis. I think many of you may recognize her name as the 20th Ward Alderman in the city of St. Louis. So I'm going to turn it over to her to talk about the Building Energy Exchange and building efficiency policies and the kind of support that needs to happen to move them forward. So, Cara? Cara, do we have you on? I know she was, there you are. Oh, you're muted, I think.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. So thanks so much, Emily. And thanks for having me here today. As Emily mentioned, I'm the new director of the Building Energy Exchange. You know, as we've talked about here today, the energy efficiency policies, the building energy performance standards. The question is, okay, so how do we support building owners in achieving these energy efficiency goals? And the Building Energy Exchange is setting up an entity. We are an entity to be just that support system. So Emily, if you don't mind, next slide. I'll talk a little bit today about the timeline, how we got here, the performance standards themselves, why we're doing this, the exchange, and what's next for us. The timeline of climate action in the city of St. Louis is we have been at the forefront, really leading on sustainability issues for many, many years. So, you know, being at the forefront of sustainability with performance standards is nothing new. In fact, going back to 2005, when Mayor Slay was in office, you know, the city of St. Louis signed the U.S. Conference of Mayors Climate Protection Agreement to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. At that point, 7% was a lofty goal. Of course, we've come a long way since then. 2009, with a $3.7 million energy efficiency block grant, we were not only able to implement energy efficiency work throughout St. Louis, but the PACE program here got started, and we were a leader in that way. In 2013, we adopted the sustainability plan. 2017 brought us the climate action plan, and 2017, of course, brought us this benchmarking ordinance. And then as Rajiv went through in 2020, we passed the building energy performance standards at the Board of Aldermen, of which I'm a member. Next slide. So why are we doing this? We've gone through a lot of this here today. Obviously, a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions will make for a healthier, better city. CO2 is really produced, the largest component of it, by buildings. And the city has the big chunk of that. The residential and commercial buildings account for 65% of greenhouse gas emissions. As Rajiv mentioned, we have a lot more inefficiency in our built environment when compared nationally, and that's a big problem. The gap between inefficient buildings and efficient buildings is enormous. It's often 4 times the energy consumption on an average basis. And lastly, of course, as we all know, why we're doing this, why we're reducing energy consumption in our buildings, why we're moving towards that, is because of the law here in the city of St. Louis. We recognize that there are problems in moving towards more efficient built environment that demand immediate action. For one thing, the building stock in the city is aging, it's inefficient, and it's just not as affordable and healthy as it could be. We also know that the real estate market is not conducive to prioritizing high performance buildings in and of itself, on its own, left to its own devices. And that's where these regulations and performance standards come in. We also know that there's a lack of information. In talking to property owners and knowing many of them, we know that many of them want to move forward in making their buildings more efficient, but just don't have the tools to do that. And lastly, one of the problems we're aiming to solve here is the inequity, especially in the affordable housing space, where property owners may want to move towards this solution, but it's not going to be a one size fits all, especially when you have a property owner who's not experiencing the reduction in the cost of the energy consumption. It's borne by that benefit is borne by their tenants. So we've got to address a wide range of issues in reducing energy consumption citywide, and that's where the Building Energy Exchange is going to come in. Next slide, please. So the Building Energy Exchange is an entity that's hosted by the USGBC. It really grew out of the work that the city of St. Louis was doing with benchmarking and the energy efficiency movement there. Our initial focus is going to be on assisting buildings that have to be compliant with the Building Energy Performance Standards. So we're going to be focusing on those buildings of 50,000 square feet or greater, but our long-term goal is we're going to be a resource well beyond that, not just for the city, but for the entire St. Louis region, while initially focusing on those that have to be in compliance. And of course, looking forward to partnering with all of you all here. We do have significant partners here already, both at the local and national level, starting with Washington University, Emden, Missouri, and Spire have been phenomenal partners here. But on the national side of things, the Building Energy Exchange in New York, we are also working with the Kansas City equivalent. So St. Louis is not doing this alone here in the Midwest. We're moving forward lock and step with a Kansas City equivalent. And we've got grants and working partnerships with other national organizations, NRDC, Elevate, and NYSEG and IMT. So what we're going to be doing moving through these next few months is really identifying gaps in the technical and financial systems of support. So my role right now and what I'm focusing on is identifying where the gaps are. We've talked about here today so many resources that are available. So getting the information out, identifying what other resources building owners need to be compliant with those standards. And the financial component is going to be an important piece. Even if it does make sense financially, you've got to have that funding up front to be able to pay for it. And then we're going to be creating key initiatives to fill those gaps. We have a business plan. So as far as what's next, we have a very detailed operation that we're going to be moving forward. And this was really something that is key to the success that we're expecting to have. The funding for this business plan was through the Energy Foundation, through the Bloomberg for the American Cities Climate Challenge. And so they really funded a pretty extensive stakeholder engagement process that included surveys and one-on-one interviews to really identify what is needed in the region. And so, but as we move through this is not a stagnant operation. So I'll be looking to the folks here on this call, but in general, making those connections and making sure that we we're continuing to identify the gaps in this area. Next slide, please. So out of that stakeholder engagement and that process, really what came to light was 4 main components that property owners and service providers really identified that the St. Louis region needs, and that's information and resources. How do we go about reducing energy consumption? How do we make our buildings more efficient? A concierge service for property owners and property managers to really walk through what that looks like, the connections to financing and the financing itself, and education and events. So elevating existing opportunities to fill in any of those gaps is one of the areas we're going to focus in. Next slide, please. The concierge service really bubbled up as the most sought after, stakeholders really expressed the most interest in this type of service. So this is really where we're going to be focusing a lot of our energy moving through the exchange, prioritizing low performance buildings within the city of St. Louis. A key component here that I want to stress is that the exchange is not going to be competing with the professionals in the realm. In fact, our goal will be to build a greater market for those services and to make those connections with the folks who need them, to the folks who are providing those services. So we're going to be making, hopefully we're going to be drumming up more business in this area. Focusing, of course, on the underinvested segments, the nonprofit, the affordable housing space I talked a little bit about earlier, recognizing that those folks are going to need a little more by the way of resources. And so following that, once we get through this, we're going to use this work in the city of St. Louis, demonstrating a success here to build momentum for the region. So, and lastly, I mentioned earlier, we have some great funders, Ameren, Spire, and Washington University, NRDC, and the Lowenstein Foundation is helping us put together the first wave of the exchange here. And I'm glad I don't have a question segment here initially, because I want to mention that I have more questions than answers right now, having been on the job for 3 weeks. What's really important here is to hear from all of you, connections to folks in the industry, folks who are working in this realm who have questions, to identify what those are so we can be the resource that our region needs to achieve these goals of energy building and building efficiency.
Thank you, Cara. That was great. You were like spot on with 10 minutes. All right, up next we have Chris Wright, who is an energy efficiency rep with Spire. He's going to talk a little bit about their incentives and offerings. Chris?
Thank you very much, Emily. I appreciate that. Yes, I'm Chris Wright from Spire. I'm an energy efficiency representative. I'm just here to speak a little bit about some of the incentives that we offer and some of the programs that are available to kind of help in this process. Our first slide, our mission is answer every challenge, advance every community, and enrich every life through the strength of our energy. Go to the next slide. So here is the residential side. Again, going to speak briefly to some of these. So whether you're buying a new home, remodeling, wanting to just save on the gas bill, we have rebates to make it easier to save on the upgrades. So we're saving money on saving money. Just basic equipment on the rebates for residential, water heater rebates, central heating rebates, combined space and water heating system rebates, programmable thermostats, things of that nature. We do have these standard residential rebates that are available for anyone that's looking to upgrade and do some cost-saving energy utility implementation. Sorry, mixing up my words there. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. I'm trying to rush, but not rush too fast. I just want to make sure to get all of this in. These are our energy efficiency commercial and industrial rebate program overviews. We do have standard, the same as with our residential rebates. These are pre-qualified list of equipment and services with fixed rebates. These are things like boilers, water heaters, programmable thermostats, steam traps, cleans, things of that nature. We do also have custom rebates, which are projects that feature energy savings, gas equipment, or technologies that aren't included in our standard rebates. Integrated facility projects resulting in gas savings, such as building shell improvements, extensive renovations. For this type of rebate, we do require a pre-approval necessary to determine the rebate commitment. We have engineers, once you show what you're planning to do, the changes, the upgrade you're planning to do, we have some engineers look at what those cost savings will be and then determine that rebate based on those savings. We also have energy audits, rebates up to 75% of the audit cost, ASHRAE level 1 minimum requirement. And it's for customers who implement at least one standard or custom rebate based off of that audit. Now the rebate that's up to 75%, that is for nonprofit organizations. For all else, it's 50% of the cost. Depending on the square footage, that does change. A minimum of $375 rebate on that, and then the bigger the property gets, maximum of $500 rebate on that actual audit. But those are some things that are available. If anyone, I know we're not doing questions right now, but later, but if anyone needs any additional information, they can email me. I know all our information will be up here later. I'd be happy to forward any of our rebate information. Like I said, I mean, the standard list is pretty long, so I couldn't list it on here like I could the residential information, but we do have a lot of that available, and I'd be happy to go over that with anyone. Next slide, please. So I did want to speak a little bit to our co-delivery with Ameren programs. So we co-deliver these programs with Ameren. There are multifamily, single family, and school kits. It's in our combined territory to achieve synergies, help eligible customers receive energy savings along with bill reductions from both energy sources. You can go to the next slide, please. And then I'll speak just a little bit to these. So on our co-delivery programs, we work with Ameren to provide the following incentives. These are just some of the incentives we have. Earlier in the year, we were able to implement some new incentives, more so than just this direct installs, such as the low flow shower heads, clean and checks on the furnace, water heater, pipe wrap, things of that nature. We were also able to add things as gas furnace replacements, storage and tankless water heater replacements, gas boiler replacements. So some of those bigger items we were able to add to our multifamily co-delivery program on the gas side of that. So this is big for not only our single family customers, low income customers that wouldn't be able to make these changes otherwise. Ameren and Spire work together to make this possible. And then for the multifamily properties, we're working with landlords just in order to get these changes in place to install these energy efficient appliances, which not only helps the environment, as we've already discussed, but helps the customer, it helps the landlord, it helps with the cost savings to get these not only installed, but then with the savings on the bill thereafter. Currently, we do work with Ameren on school kits as well, which is just to raise customer awareness. The school kits have low flow faucet aerators, low flow shower heads, pipe wrap, dirty filter alarms, just to kind of also get a little bit more information out there on what cost saving, energy saving, small changes can make a big difference. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So here is my information. Again, I just kind of went through that fairly quickly. I couldn't list out everything, every incentive we have on there. We'd be speaking for quite a while, but I do have all this information available. Here is my contact information. So if you'd like to call or send an email, I'd be more than happy to speak with you or send over the documentation, anything that we have that would help you and get you the information you need to be a part of the process.
Great. Thank you, Chris. We will take a few questions at the end, so if people have anything, we'll open that back up. But we're going to move on to Ameren's incentive program. And I have Matt Farwig here today. He's a business development specialist with Ameren Missouri Biz Savers. So Matt, you want to take it away?
Yeah, thanks, Emily. One of the benefits of going last is about 95% of my work is done. So great job from everybody on the presentations. Really good detail on our program. So I'm going to kind of step back and talk about the program as a whole, or from a outer perspective, and kind of show everything that is available. So basically, Ameren Biz Savers provides cash incentives to offset the initial cost of energy efficient upgrades. If you don't mind going to the next slide, Emily. And basically, we're here to help offset those costs of making your building BEPS compliant. And we get a question a lot of why. Why does Ameren, the company that sells power, want people to use less power? So one of the biggest benefits from the Ameren perspective is, it was mentioned earlier, is the peak demand. So Ameren, it costs a lot of money to keep power plants on standby, or even build more power plants in the future to meet future demand. So it's much more cost effective to just lower your energy consumption now, and then try to offset that in the future with more power plants. And Ameren also has a goal of becoming net carbon neutral by 2050. So by lowering energy consumption, it basically helps meet those goals a lot quicker. And then with our incentives, they not only help offset that initial cost of upgrading your inefficient equipment, but it's also going to save you a lot of energy cost into the future. So it's really a win-win for everybody involved. And something we always stress is, for any equipment upgrades that you're planning on doing, reach out to us. So we're going to go into some specifics of what equipment is covered under our incentive program. But if it's something you don't see on our standard program or in any of our brochures, still reach out to us. There's a very good possibility that we can still pay incentives on any equipment that's going to save electrical energy. And just to verify, our program, the one I'm discussing here, it pertains particularly to commercial and industrial electrical customers of Ameren, Illinois. So anybody, or excuse me, in the Ameren, Missouri territory. So anybody that's not residential. And there is a similar program in Illinois for commercial and residential. But what we're looking at today here applies to the Ameren, Missouri territory, strictly non-residential. And next slide, please, Emily. And so just to kind of give you an overview of the program, it's been around for about 12 years. And if we look at just last year's impact, you can see how beneficial it's been. So we did 2,598 projects last year. And those projects saved 147,531,000 kilowatt hours. And to give you some perspective, your average US residential home uses about 10,000 kilowatt hours. You can see how impactful this program is, in reducing energy usage. And then from those 26 projects that we did last year, we paid out over $15,317,000. So it's very, very impactful and very beneficial, again, to Ameren, and of course to our customers as well. Next slide, please. And so our program, it runs on a 3-year cycle. And this year, 2021, is the end of that current cycle. However, we have been approved by the PSC that Emily mentioned, the Power Service Commission, to extend our program for another year. And that doesn't mean that it's going away after that. We'll just have to essentially develop a new program and implement that in 2023. But basically, the program that we have now will carry forward in next year. And Biz Savers is the overarching program. And then within Biz Savers, there's multiple programs within that. So we'll dig a little deeper on the top 3, just so you're aware of all the ones that are available. There's a standard program, which is the most common type. That's, the lighting, the HVAC. Those are what, guaranteed called the low-hanging fruit. Those are our most common types of program incentives. And then the custom program, that's available for any equipment upgrades that do not fall under our standard program. And then Matt did an excellent job of talking about retro commissioning. That's another program that we offer that has great incentives. And then also, if you're building a new building or extending another branch, we do have a program for new construction as well. And then we can also provide training to become a building operator, which is someone who's basically trained to make sure that a building's running at its max efficiency. And then finally, we've got a program called the Small Business Direct Loan or Direct Install. And basically that's available to 2M rate class customers, which is considered small commercial. So commercial customers that don't use a lot of energy. And basically you'll get a little bit higher incentives through that program if you're classified as a small commercial customer. Next slide, please. So yeah, so again, the standard program provides incentives for our most common equipment types. LED lighting, which Guaranteed did an excellent job of explaining. Smart thermostats, HVAC, and then also if you own a building that contains a restaurant, we have incentives for commercial cooking, which includes steam cookers and food holding cabinets. And then also commercial refrigeration, so freezers and refrigerators. And then we do have incentives for electric water heaters, and then VFDs, the variable frequency drives. We offer great incentives for those as well. And then with the standard program, we pay our incentives on a per unit or per watt saved basis. And we always prefer that you reach out to us in advance if you're planning any equipment upgrades to get pre-approval for the incentives. But within standard program, you can make the equipment upgrades and then apply for the incentives on the back end. And if your incentive amount has the potential to exceed $15,000, we're always want you to apply in advance of upgrading your equipment. That way you can exceed that $15,000 cap. And then we always want to stress that if you've made any sort of equipment upgrades since March of 2019, particularly for lighting and HVAC, please reach out to us because it's very likely that we can pay you incentives for those upgrades. So basically what we've done is gone back to the beginning of our incentive cycle. And if you've upgraded HVAC or lighting and haven't applied for incentives, we're willing to pay you for that. So we highly encourage you to reach out to us. Next slide, please, Emily. And then the custom program, again, is available for equipment upgrades that don't fall within our standard program. So a good example is if fluorescent bulbs, those were big roughly about 10 years ago. Those don't fall under our standard program, but what we can do is do a calculation to determine how much energy by switching to LED. And then for lighting, for example, we'll pay 8 cents per kilowatt hour saved. So the main takeaway here again is if you're doing any upgrade, please let us know. And if it doesn't fall under that standard program, we can still likely pay incentives for that custom program. Next slide, Emily. And then Matt, again, did an awesome job explaining this, but retro commissioning is available. Typically want to see it for buildings that are over 100,000 square feet. And buildings, essentially like everything, they degrade over time. And retro commissioning, we always compare it to tuning up your car to make it run as optimal as possible. And basically a study is performed. They locate where your inefficiencies are, and then by fixing or upgrading those efficiencies, typically it's not hard to hit a 10% savings on your annual energy consumption. And it's not uncommon for us to see savings of 20 to 25% annually on your electrical consumption. And as Matt mentioned, we do have a requirement that it pays itself off within 18 months. So meaning that however much money you spend on the study and the upgrades, you will recoup those costs within 18 months. And that'll be done through the incentives that we'll pay, as well as your reduction in energy costs. So if you own or manage a larger size building, very, very highly recommend looking into the retro commissioning program. Next slide, please. All right, and then if you're interested in getting started on earning incentives, for any upgrades that you might be thinking of, our website's a great place to start. So it's amronmissouri.com/bizsavers. You can find our qualified trade allies, some of which presented today, who are trained and are very skilled and experienced in utilizing our incentive program. And if you have a project that you want to start, but you don't know who to reach out to, we do have a job board there where you can post, the scope of work you're wanting to have completed. And then that will basically get sent out to our trade allies who can then bid on that project. And then we also have video testimonials, and then all of our brochures, applications are all located there as well that you can download. And there is also information on there about the demand response program. So that's a separate program from Ameren where if you're a high consumer of energy, you can coordinate with Ameren, where on days where peak demand is up hot, or there's peak demand where everybody's using a lot of energy, typically the hottest days of the year, you can coordinate with Ameren to reduce your energy consumption, and they'll pay incentives for that. Again, they're trying to reduce the amount of power being consumed, on those hottest days of the year. The next slide, please. And then for contact info, I'll put my personal email in the chat, but you can always reach us at bizsavers@ameren.com, or if you want to give us a call at 866-941-7299. We're happy to assist in any way. You can jump to the last slide, please. And then, so the main takeaways from today is no matter what type of upgrade you're doing, reach out to see if we can pay incentives for it. We're happy to check. And then any equipment on the standard incentive lists that do not require pre-approval, if the amount is under $15,000. And then again, if you've done any sort of upgrade, primarily lighting and HVAC since March of 2019, let us know, and we're happy to see, and we can very likely pay you incentives for those upgrades. And then I believe Matt mentioned the bonus earlier, and I've got on my slide here. Unfortunately, those bonus funds have, but we still have great incentive rates for all equipment upgrades. And then again, the BizSavers website and is the best resource to get started at. And that is it.
Great, thank you, Matt. So we do have a few more minutes before we're set to wrap up at 10 o'clock. If people have additional questions, drop those in the chat, or you can unmute. We don't have all that many people here. So, and I think I mentioned earlier that as long as it's okay with all of our presenters, I can make the slides available. So, right. Any questions? Or do you all need 5 minutes back of your day?
I have a question.
Go for it, Lisa.
So I asked a question earlier about the metric for increasing the standard requirements in the future, potentially after 2025, after this first 4-year interval. And I understand that the EUI is the metric for the measurement, but my question is really, what will be the basis of tightening that restriction? In other words, if right now it's a percentage of, a baseline, will it be an additional percentage reduction in energy? I'm just curious what the thoughts are on this future change for people who are planning maybe some large capital projects or potentially building a new building.
Rajiv, I think, can you take that question? I'm not seeing him. Maybe he jumped off. So I think just to, Lisa, I think what's going to happen, at least this is my understanding, is that, there'll be a re-examination of the data, so after the first compliance cycle, after 2025, there'll be a gap year where the city will review where the benchmarking data is and those EUIs, and make a determination on what the next what the next target will be, if that makes sense. But I think your point is important. Like, if people are thinking about the capital, like longer term capital improvements, how will that affect those decisions that people might be making right now? And part of Rajiv's presentation, he talked about the kind of incentive for deeper retrofits. So if you can by 2020, if you want to make some of those investments like now and can comply, beyond the EUI that's set for your building, you could be in compliance for multiple rounds, right? So you would be in compliance for the next 10 years or even 15 years, depending on how far you took that how far you took it. And I think there is I'm gonna try to pull up that slide real quick, just to review that, because I always forget the exact numbers. Let's see. So, sorry, just sharing my screen again. So here's this rewarding early adopters, is that if your EUI is at or below the 35th percentile and you reduce by 20% or more, you're compliant for the first cycle, which is 2025, and then the next. And if you go to 50%, then you'd be compliant for 3 cycles. So that's kind of a way to address that unknown that you're talking about. Yeah. Does that help?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks.
Other questions? I see Cara put her contact in the chat, so feel free to reach out to her if you have ideas on the building energy exchange and how that can be a resource to your building or your company if you're in the service side of things, the trade ally side of things. Yes. We do have a Cardinals game tonight. I'm glad it's not here because it might be rained out.
Can I make one more comment? I also want to say we talked a lot about incentives, but don't let the funding or upfront costs scare you. There are lots of other financing options. I think Kathy Evans is here too with Wire Green. I had to step out for another meeting, so I don't know if she presented at all too. But there are financing options, and because it's energy efficiency, you can pay those loans back through your savings. So even you could, it's very, very possible that you could be cash flow positive from day one with energy efficiency. And because you're paying those savings back because you're paying those loans back through your energy savings, they can also be considered off the books. So you can take those loans, pay them back with your energy savings, but they don't necessarily hit anything like your debt equity ratio or your credit limits or anything like that. So there are lots of options out there, PACE and depending upon, there's like the mode D loans that are available to some types of businesses, depending upon who you are. So don't let, any upfront numbers scare you. Energy efficiency pays back, and it pays back quickly. That was the first slide. I love that slide that you shared, Emily, about, it's very cost effective to do energy efficiency. So this isn't a burden by any opportunity. This is actually the city pushing us towards some really good opportunities and hopefully just giving us that little extra bit of motivation.
Great point, Matt. Thanks for bringing that up. And yeah, Byron and Kathy are here from Y Green, who work on PACE in both the city and St. Louis County. So definitely encourage people to seek that resource out as well. All right, any other questions? We will go ahead and wrap up then. I just want to thank our presenters again, Rajiv, Nick, Dena, Matt, Cara, Chris, and Matt. All of you did a great job. I really appreciate everybody's time today, and have a wonderful rest of your day, and happy Energy Efficiency Day, but I think more importantly, go Cards. So take care, everybody.